Hello, and welcome to Rosalora. If you're new here, it's so lovely to see you, and if you're returning, then it's so wonderful to have you back. Today, what I'm going to be working on is a piece of Knaphe, which I thought was going to be very simple, a little bit more of a concept sketch or an idea that just completely flew out of my hands. Now, I've been working on different concepts for runish formal wear. I have another video where I draw Knaphe in a winter court style formal wear piece based in like whites and grays and silvers and blues for her winter fae aspect. But I wanted to design something a little bit more runish traditional. Rune being a fictional country that comes from my DM's homebrew world. And he's been letting me have a lot of fun with designing runish court fashion, so I've been going absolutely ham with that. As you can see, I pulled up some references of like Tudor era, like recreation costumes, some old art that I'm using as reference. I really like the sleeves and the skirts, and I was also really attracted to some of the fur trim that I saw on the reference photos, which I'm going to be incorporating into the hem of Knaphe's dress, as well as over on the neckline. But I know that this video is going to be a little bit longer just because the process took forever. So I wanted to maybe do a little bit of a meet and greet. Wanted to tell people a little bit more about Knaphe and who she is, where she comes from, and what her story has been thus far. So Knaphe is a runish noble. She grew up in the semi-countryside of Rune, which is described as being, more rural than not. Lots of plains, agriculture, lots of sheep and farmland, orchards, and that sort of, vibe going on in Rune. The people of Rune detest magic. They see it as a shortcut that their neighbors to the east have a penchant for taking advantage of that they aren't a big proponent of. The other country in this scenario, Tillinor, was actually part of Rune until Tillinor kind of ended up getting with some of the elves in the area, and we're like, oh, magic isn't so bad. And Rune was like, no, it's still bad. And then they had a war about it, and the war is still ongoing. Also, this is the part of the speed paint where Knaphe's face will be very scary. I promise, you have to stick with me. We're strong together. We're strong together, and we can get through her very unfortunate face moment that's happening here. I fought her face for so long in this picture. I tried changing the shape. Eventually I, end up moving one of the eyes over. I have to make her nose longer. But her face did not want to work with me in this picture. But anyway, Rune has a long and storied history of knights and quests, and of course, they're kind of made all the harder by the fact that runish knights, on the whole, don't use magic. So you have the problem of magical creatures being in Rune, and, knights will go off and gallantly quest and hunt them down, but there's always one more. There's always more problems, and there's a sort of backwardness to Rune that gets made fun of both in campaign and also out of character as well. Because it's true, they can be pretty dense at times. But something that Knaphe grew up with was the idea of nobility, valor, and protecting the people around you. Now, Rune uses kind of, I'll say, vassal states, where there are nobles that own land, and then there are, like, sort of citizenry who work and live there. The Runish way of life is that you have a noble who takes care of, sort of the peasantry around, through protecting them, making sure that they are well fed, well kept, nobody bothers them. And in return, the people of the, small town where you have all the agriculture and all of the goods being made, will share what they have with the vassal lord. Now, obviously, there's a lot of flaws here. And as said, Rune gets dunked on a lot in character for all of its flaws. But Knaphe grew up on this idea of protecting others and being a good noble's daughter. Knaphe is specifically a baron's daughter, and that sort of title of baron has been passed down through the Exley family for some time. And she takes great pride in the idea of being part of this family and making sure that she takes care of the people that are around her. When talking to her party mates, some of the stories that she tells are about protecting, some of the hen houses from foxes or hunting down a wild boar that was starting to cause problems in the fields. She very much considers herself to be a protector of people and was raised on the idea that if you don't treat the citizenry well around that you're in charge of, that not only will it not go well for you as a noble, but everyone is going to die. If you don't do a good job, it will lead to everybody around you dying. And Knaphe was very much looking forward to being eventually the woman of her house and taking over some of the responsibilities that her parents had set her up for. Knaphe is an only child, but she lives in an extended family. She lives with an uncle, a couple of aunts, 3 cousins, and her sort of like maternal and paternal grandparents, one from each side of the family, as some have very sadly passed away. And so Knaphe kind of comes from this very strong idea, not only of like the nuclear family, but an extended family that also extended out into the lands beyond, the small manor that her family had. Being able to go into town and interact with people there, even though it was very small and kind of spread out because we're dealing with more of a rural situation, she considered knowing the people around her and being able to protect them to be a great honor. And so she keeps that really close to heart. Now, if you've seen my other videos about Knaphe, I've talked a little bit about how she's fey-touched, and therefore has been outcast from her family. In fact, they contracted killers to take care of Knaphe and to make sure that she would never darken their doorway again. Obviously, that was unsuccessful. Instead, she ended up in this campaign where we have found ourselves tied to a big crystal that keeps bringing the characters back to life, even when we beef it, which Knaphe has actually, she's done. I would have actually had to reroll a new character, so I was very grateful because I've enjoyed playing Knaphe. But Knaphe grew up in this environment where she thought that she was going to have to take care of people in a way that she definitely wanted to, and now has been deprived of that. She's going through it, as one would say. She's unlearning a lot of the xenophobic, I'll say learning traditions that Runish education and philosophy have kind of drilled into her. She has a Leonin and a Dragonborn and a Changeling and a Dark Elf as members of her party now, and she cannot get away with them, or get away from them, and she wants to get along with them, so that's had a really big impact on her. But I wanted to create this portrait, this idea, this picture as like a mirror into the person that Knaphe was before she had to leave home. So I wanted to play on her colors for her family, which I've described before as being gold, indigo, and maroon. So we can see a lot of that here. In fact, choosing that gold for the dress felt, I'll say, risky. I wasn't sure if it was going to wash her out and, not make her skin look quite right, but I think that we've been able to balance the tone. We have these long maroon sleeves, and we have her sort of blue being represented by her dark hair. I wanted this picture to kind of have this feeling of anticipation, excitement, Knaphe, growing up in the countryside, didn't have a lot of opportunities to go to dances or social gatherings with other nobles. She and her family were a little bit more isolated. And while she definitely enjoyed growing up where she did and interacting with the people that she did, the idea of going out to a big party and being able to dance and have fun was a big deal to her. So I wanted to convey this feeling of like, oh, she's descending the stairs. She's going to, talk to her uncle Elias or her father or her mother and, ask them like, oh, do I look okay? Am I ready to go? And for them to, you know, to look at her and tell her like, oh, you look so beautiful. It's so wonderful. I wanted to capture the feeling of her descending those stairs full of excitement. And I think that I've been able to do that. Something that kind of carried through this entire piece were the levels of detail. Knaphe has fur trim on her dress and on her neckline because she's an archer and a hunter. She has juniper branches on the bodice because it's part of her family's crest. The pearls are supposed to be sort of like a more modest version of any wealth that the Exley family might have. And of course, because she is a wanting knight of Rune, she would like to be a knight errant. She carries with her a rapier, and she has armor along her shoulder. And that was important to me. The excitement of having both the decadence of the time and also the armor is important. And I've talked about that a little bit before in my other video where I explain Runish court armor and go into a little bit more detail about how I would dress Knaphe in it. But I wanted to do something that was really fun. Now, one of the other players in the game mentioned that when he saw this done, he was like, oh, this looks like something that would have been on the wall and now it's stuck in an attic. And that was so good, and it broke my heart. I set up Knaphe's family to be very loving and very supportive of her, but when she became Fey-touched, it all fell apart, and they turned on her because of that xenophobia and because of their hatred of magic. And so it becomes a very tragic story for Knaphe. As I'm laying in these final little bits of light and shadow, it's lovely to see that sort of image emerge. I was worried for a while because of the browns that this painting might end up feeling muddy or undefined, but I'm very happy with the way that it turned out, and I just love the way that she looks. So thank you so much for joining me today. I know that I rambled a little bit, but I hope that you enjoyed learning about Knaphe and a little bit about her family and her personal history and where she comes from. As we look through some of the details, I'm just so happy with the way that the rendering came out on the pearls, the embroidery, the thread, the armor, everything. And it feels like a step forward, and I'm happy for that. As always, I want to thank my patrons who help me make art, especially Banjo, Confocal Clips, and Dieter, my $15 patrons. If you like what I do, feel free to hit that subscribe button, that like button, leave me a comment and tell me what you thought about this speed draw. If you like what I do, you can always support me on Patreon. I'd be happy to have you. And of course, remember, it's all gonna be okay. See you next time.